give me liberty or give me death.
It is, without a doubt, the most fair sequence of 7 words in the history of the American Revolution.
It really is. It's the ultimate rock star anthem of 1775. I mean, you hear that line and you instantly picture Patrick Henry. He's standing in a church pew, veins popping in his neck, fist in the air.
Rallying the troops against the British Empire.
Exactly. It's the definitive line in the sand moment for the country.
It is. It's the moment the revolution arguably became inevitable. But here's where things get a bit complicated.
Oh, I love when things get complicated.
Right. Well, what if I told you that while this sentiment was very real, the specific recording of that speech, the text that we all memorized in school, is actually something of a remix created decades later?
See, this is exactly why I love these deep dives. You take something everyone assumes is just set in stone, and you realize it's actually a lot more fluid.
Very fluid.
So for all of you listening today, we are unpacking the myth and the reality of Patrick Henry's famous cry. We've got a great stack of sources here. Historical accounts, 19th century biographies, even some analysis of 18th century theater.
Yes, the theater aspect is wild.
Right. So our mission is to figure out what actually happened on March 23, 1775.
And perhaps even more importantly, we need to ask, does it even matter if he actually said those specific words? Or is the myth more powerful than the actual transcript?
Ooh, that is a philosophical curveball right out of the gate. I like it. But before we get to the conspiracy theories about who wrote what and the whole remix accusation, we really have to set the scene.
Because this speech didn't just happen in a vacuum.
No, and
Yeah.
it didn't happen in a comfortable legislative hall either.
Not at all. So the date is March 23, 1775. The location is St. John's Episcopal Church in Richmond, Virginia. This was the Second Virginia Convention.
And the reason they are meeting in a church in Richmond rather than the Capitol building in Williamsburg is because it just wasn't safe, right?
Exactly. Williamsburg was where the royal governor, Lord Dunmore, was stationed. The tensions with the British were already so high that the colonial leaders felt they needed to move inland.
Get away from the immediate reach of the British authorities.
Right. So they packed themselves into this church.
And the room is full of absolute heavy hitters. Our sources note that future presidents George Washington and Thomas Jefferson are sitting right there. Richard Henry Lee is there.
It's a packed house.
But based on the accounts, the mood wasn't exactly, let's go to war.
Far from it. That's the key context we often forget when we look back. We look back with hindsight and think of the revolution was a foregone conclusion.
Sure.
But in March 1775, most of the men in that room were moderates. I mean, they were wealthy, established landowners. They had a massive amount to lose.
They were terrified of treason charges. Because if they declare war and lose, they don't just get fined.
No, they hang.
Right.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So the prevailing mood was caution. There were people arguing that they should just send another petition to the king, try to smooth things over one more time.
And that's when Patrick Henry stands up.
Right. He stands up to argue that hoping for peace at this stage was a complete delusion.
He was basically the guy shaking them by the shoulders saying, wake up.
He was introducing amendments to raise a militia independent of royal authority. Basically, he was arguing for the creation of a Virginian army to fight the British. And his core argument was incredibly simple. The war isn't coming. It's already here.
I have the text here, or at least the text we think is right, and his rhetoric is just masterful. He systematically strips away that comfort blanket of peace.
Yes.
He says, the war is actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms.
Yeah, that imagery is incredibly powerful. He's referring to the situation up in Massachusetts where the British were already clamping down hard.
Right.
He's telling these comfortable Virginia gentlemen, look, you might feel safe here in Richmond, but the chains are already clanking on the plains of Boston.
He completely frames it as a binary choice. It isn't a debate about war versus peace anymore. It's freedom versus slavery.
And we really should pause on that word, slavery. Henry uses it repeatedly. He says, our chains are forged. He asks, is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery?
Yeah.
It's a very specific rhetorical device in the 18th century to describe political subjugation.
Which creates a really complex and frankly uncomfortable irony, given that many men in that room, including Patrick Henry himself, were enslavers.
It is a heavy contradiction that runs through the entire era. But in the immediate context of this speech, he's using the word to trigger their deepest fear of losing autonomy.
Now, here is a detail from our sources that I honestly had no idea about before this deep dive. It wasn't just a speech, it was a full-blown physical performance.
It was incredibly theatrical.
Oh.
Henry wasn't just a lawyer. He was a master of the stage.
The sources mentioned that when he got to the climax, the whole "give me liberty" part, he didn't just shout it from his pew, he acted it out.
Yes.
Allegedly, he took a bone paper knife.
Which is essentially like a letter opener.
Right, a bone paper knife, and he literally plunged it toward his own chest.
He was imitating the Roman patriot, Cato the Younger.
Okay.
In the classical education of the 18th century, Cato was the ultimate symbol of republican virtue. He was the man who famously committed suicide rather than submit to the tyranny of Julius Caesar.
So by mimicking that stabbing motion with the letter opener, Henry is visually signaling to everyone in the room, "I am the American Cato. I will die before I submit."
Exactly. It's a suicide gesture. He's showing them that death is literally the only alternative to liberty.
I just try to imagine seeing that in church. A guy pretending to stab himself with a letter opener while screaming about death. It must have been electrifying.
It was, and it worked. But the reaction in the room wasn't immediate applause or cheering.
No.
No, it was stunned silence.
Profound silence, the sources say.
Edmund Randolph reported that the convention sat in dead silence for several minutes. They were just processing the absolute gravity of what had just happened. George Mason, who was usually the cool, logical head in the room, he said later that the audience's passions were not their own after Henry spoke.
Not their own. That is such a great description. It's like he cast a spell over the whole congregation. And there's this amazing anecdote in our materials about a guy named Edward Carrington.
Ah, yes. Carrington wasn't even inside the church. It was so packed that he was forced to listen from a window outside.
He was so moved by what he heard through that open window that he requested to be buried at that exact spot.
Yeah.
And get this, in 1810, he got his wish. He is literally buried right where he stood listening to Patrick Henry.
That really highlights that this wasn't just some logical argument for a militia. It was a visceral, emotional event. It changed people on a deeply personal level.
And it had immediate results, too. The spell worked. The convention passed the resolution. They voted to put the colony into a posture of defense.
Which is 18th century speak for get the guns ready. Henry was immediately named chairman of the committee to build this new militia.
But this is where the story usually fades to black for most of us. We think, okay, speech over, war starts a little while later.
Right.
But our sources detail something called the gunpowder incident that happens just a month later. And this isn't just a footnote. It's like the action movie sequel to the courtroom drama.
It really is. It proves that Henry wasn't just all talk. This happened in April 1775, right after the battles of Lexington and Concord up north. The news of those battles hadn't fully arrived in Virginia yet.
Okay.
But the governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, realized things were getting extremely dangerous. He saw these militias forming just like Henry asked for, so he decided to make a preemptive strike.
He went after the ammo.
He did. He ordered Royal Navy sailors to sneak into the magazine in Williamsburg in the dead of night and remove the gunpowder.
Which effectively disarms the colony. You can have all the muskets in the world, but without powder, they're just heavy clubs.
Exactly. And when Patrick Henry heard about this, he didn't write a sternly worded letter to the editor. He rallied his new militia, the very one he just argued into existence, and he marched on Williamsburg.
He marched on the king's representative. I mean, that is treason, plain and simple.
It was an absolute act of war. As Henry's forces got closer to Williamsburg, they were gathering more men along the way. Lord Dunmore started to panic. He threatened to burn the town down. He threatened to free the enslaved population to fight the colonists. It was a completely chaotic situation.
But it didn't end in a shootout, right?
No, it didn't. It ended with a transaction. A wealthy intermediary stepped in to cool things down. A payment of £330 was made to Henry to pay for the stolen powder.
I looked at the notes on this. That is over £53,000, or about $60,000 in today's money. That is a serious settlement.
It was a massive sum. Henry took the money, issued a formal receipt, and sent his militia home. But the symbolic victory was what really mattered. He had forced the royal governor to back down.
No.
Lord Dunmore was fearing for his safety and eventually retreated to a naval vessel off the coast. That effectively ended royal control of the Virginia colony.
So the speech worked. It fired people up, they mobilized, they got paid, and they kicked out the governor. Patrick Henry eventually becomes the first governor of the independent state. Case closed, history written. I know that tone. Here comes the twist.
This is where we have to dive into the aha moment regarding the text of the speech itself. We have to talk about where those famous words, "give me liberty" or "give me death," actually came from.
Okay, lay it on me. I assume someone was taking notes in the church.
That is the problem. The speech was not written down when it was delivered in 1775.
Wait, no stenographer, no diary entry from Jefferson saying Henry just dropped this exact cool line.
Not really, no. We have the resolution that passed, the actual legal text. But the text of the speech itself, it vanished into the air the moment he said it.
So how do we know what he said?
We know it, or rather, we think we know it because of a man named William Wirt. Wirt was a biographer who decided to write the definitive life story of Patrick Henry. But here is the major catch. Wirt published his biography in 1817. Let me just do the math on that. 1775 to 1817. That is 42 years later.
And Patrick Henry had been dead for 18 years by the time the book even came out.
So Wirt couldn't exactly call him up to fact-check the draft.
Precisely. Wirt had to completely reconstruct the speech based on the recollections of elderly men who had heard it in their youth. He was writing letters to these old revolutionaries asking, hey, do you remember what he said 4 decades ago?
I can barely remember what I said in a meeting last week. I can't imagine trying to reconstruct a complex political speech from 40 years ago verbatim.
That is exactly the issue historians have. One of the people Wirt reached out to was a man named St. George Tucker. Tucker really tried to help. He sent Wirt a letter with his recollection, but he explicitly admitted it was in vain to try and recall the exact speech.
Sure.
He provided about 2 paragraphs of his rough memory, just trying to capture the general spirit of the argument.
2 paragraphs. But the speech we all read in the history books is pages long. It's this sweeping masterpiece of rhetoric. It is a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Because William Wirt took those 2 paragraphs and he filled in the blanks. He used his own incredible skill as a writer and a lawyer to create the long, flowery, beautifully structured speech we know today.
So you're saying give me liberty or give me death might be, what, William Wirt fan fiction?
Fan fiction might be a bit harsh,
Mm-hmm.
but historical reconstruction is very accurate. Historians since the 1970s have been very skeptical about the authenticity of the Wirt version. They point out that the style doesn't actually match Henry's other known, documented speeches.
How so? Was Henry just not that polished normally?
It's not about polish, it's about the content of his typical arguments. Whenever Henry argued for forming militias in other contexts, he almost always invoked the fear of Indian attacks on the frontier.
Ah.
That was his go-to argument, to scare people into arming themselves. But Wirt's version leaves that out entirely.
Interesting. So Wirt strips out the messy, uncomfortable frontier politics and makes the whole thing purely about high-minded liberty.
Exactly. And a surviving first-hand account, one of the very few partial notes we actually have mentioned, that Henry used some pretty graphic name-calling during the speech.
Really?
Yeah, he was a rough, aggressive speaker when he needed to be. But Wirt's version is very sanitized. It reads more like a noble Roman senator speaking, not a Virginia backcountry lawyer.
So the most famous speech in American history might be largely the invention of a biographer writing almost half a century later, just trying to create a legend.
That is the consensus of many modern historians. Wirt wasn't just recording history, he was building a national myth.
But wait, if Wirt made up the bulk of it, where did he get the specific line, give me liberty or give me death? Did he just pull it out of thin air? Or did Henry actually say that one part?
This leads us right to the cultural context of the time. You see, that phrase or variations of it was already in the cultural water, so to speak. It wasn't an original invention by Henry or Wirt.
Who said it first then?
Well, remember how we talked about the bone knife and the suicide gesture mimicking Cato?
Right, the Roman guy.
There was a very direct link to a play called Cato, a tragedy, which was written in 1713.
So it was an old classic by the time Henry was speaking.
It was incredibly popular in the American colonies. It was essentially the Hamilton of its day.
Oh.
George Washington absolutely loved it. He actually had it performed for the troops at Valley Forge years later to boost their morale.
So everyone in that church would have known this play.
Most likely, yes.
Yeah.
And here is the kicker. There is a line in Act 2, Scene 4 of that play that goes, "It is not now a time to talk of aught, but chains or conquest, liberty or death."
Liberty or death, it's right there.
It is right there. So we have 2 distinct possibilities. One, Patrick Henry, who was already acting out the suicide scene of Cato, also quoted the line from the play because he knew it would perfectly resonate with his audience.
Which makes total sense. He's basically sampling the pop culture of the day to make his point hit harder.
It's exactly. Or possibility 2. William Wirt, writing 40 years later, knew that Henry mimicked Cato, so he just inserted the line from the play into the written speech because it fit the theatrical vibe he was trying to recreate.
Either way, it wasn't a brand new sentence. It was a deliberate cultural reference.
And it goes back even further than that, too. You can trace similar sentiments back to the Declaration of Arbroath in 1320 regarding Scottish independence.
Really?
Yes. And Handel's oratorio Judas Maccabeus from 1746 has the explicit line, "Resolve, my sons, on liberty or death."
So Patrick Henry, or Wirt, was tapping into a very old, very established tradition. Liberty or death is basically the Western shorthand for we are the good guys fighting for freedom.
It communicates a specific set of values instantly. It completely removes the gray area. There is no compromise, only total victory or total erasure.
But the story doesn't stop in 1775 or even 1817. What I found so fascinating in our sources is how this specific phrase became a global virus of rebellion. It just spreads everywhere.
It truly does. It totally transcends the American Revolution. Once Wirt put it in print, it became a universal slogan for resistance globally.
The sources list so many examples of this. During the French Revolution, the famous motto, liberty, equality, fraternity, was sometimes written as liberty, equality, fraternity, or death.
Which puts a much darker Robespierre-style spin on it. It implies, join us or you die.
Then you have the Society of United Irishmen in the 1790s using liberty or death as their official slogan.
And moving into South America, the national anthem of Uruguay contains the line, liberty or with glory to die. In Brazil, Emperor Pedro I issued the famous cry from Ipiranga in 1822, which was independence or death.
It seems like every revolution needs this exact ultimatum. It's binary. There is no third option.
That is exactly why it is so effective. It forces people to pick a side right then and there. You see in the Russian Civil War, too. Nestor Makhno's anarchist army in Ukraine used liberty or death on their black flags.
And it comes all the way up to modern times. The sources mention Malcolm X.
Yes. His incredibly famous speech in 1964 called The Ballot or the Bullet.
In that speech, he riffs on this concept explicitly. He says, it'll be liberty or it will be death. But he adds a powerful twist. He says, the only difference about this kind of death, it'll be reciprocal.
He's taking the Henry framework, that foundational American myth, and claiming it directly for the civil rights struggle. He's telling his audience, we are just as American as Patrick Henry, and we are willing to die and fight for the exact same rights.
And even more recently, we see it in China. This was really surprising to find in the research.
It is stark. In 2012, a young village official named Ren Jianyu was sentenced to re-education through labor, and one of the pieces of evidence the state used against him was a T-shirt.
A T-shirt?
A T-shirt that simply said, give me liberty or give me death, in Chinese.
That is incredible. A T-shirt with a quote from 1775 is used as literal evidence of subversion in 2012.
It shows how dangerous those words still are to authoritarian regimes today. And in 2022, during the COVID-19 lockdown protests in Chongqing, our sources show a man was filmed shouting that exact phrase repeatedly to a cheering crowd.
It's amazing. A lawyer in Virginia in 1775, or maybe his biographer in 1817, puts these words together, and 250 years later, they're being used on the other side of the world to protest a lockdown.
It speaks to the absolute universality of the human desire for autonomy. The specifics change, whether it's British taxes, colonial rule, segregation, lockdowns, but the core sentiment remains exactly the same.
So let's bring it all back home for you listening. We have unpacked the speech, the theatrical stabbing, the gunpowder sequel, the ghostwriter controversy, and the global tour of the phrase.
It is quite a journey for 7 words.
If you had to summarize the reality of this myth, what is the headline here?
The headline is that the give me liberty or give me death speech is a perfect storm of history and memory. Patrick Henry definitely gave a fiery speech that started a war. He definitely marched for that gunpowder. But the specific words we quote, they are highly likely a reconstruction, a remix by William Wirt, filtered heavily through the pop culture of the 18th century, like the play Cato.
It's like a collaboration across time. Henry provided the fire, and Wirt provided the poetry.
That is a beautiful way to put it. Henry lived the action, but Wirt wrote the script that we all remember.
But it leaves us with that big question you teased at the very beginning. If Wirt made up the best parts, is it a lie?
This is the provocative thought I want to leave you with today. Does it actually matter if an audio recording would have matched Wirt's text? The spirit of that speech burned itself into the memory of everyone in that church. It changed the course of history. It convinced a colony to go to war.
So the effect was entirely real, even if the transcript wasn't.
Exactly. Sometimes a myth becomes more powerful and perhaps more real in its consequences than the literal, dry facts of what was whispered or shouted on a given day. The words "give me liberty" or "give me death" captured the absolute truth of the moment, even if they weren't the exact truth of the mouth.
That is definitely something for you to chew on. History isn't just what happened, it's the story we tell ourselves about what happened. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
Always a pleasure.
And to you listening, next time you hear a famous quote, maybe dig a little deeper. You never know what historical remix you might find. Catch you on the next deep dive.